It all began with a small trip. 5 friends, Sarah, Chris, Emma, Jason, and Mike, decided to head into the northern forest with tents and a camera. The idea seemed fun. Record their adventures and catch fish in Round Lake. But none of them had any idea what this would lead to. The lake was hard to reach. The dirt road had been washed out after the rain, and the navigator kept malfunctioning. Sarah was driving while the others happily sang along to the playlist, which was full of amusing songs. Suddenly, the road came to a fork that wasn't on the map. "Which way?" Sarah asked, a hint of nervousness in her voice. It suddenly felt like the road was too dark, too quiet. "Left, let's go. It'll get us there faster," Chris exclaimed, opening the map on his phone. Sarah complied and turned. Every kilometer took them deeper into the forest, which grew denser and denser. The road now looked like a forgotten trail, covered with layers of fallen leaves. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the roar of the engine. The car jerked and stopped. Everyone turned to Sarah. "What happened?" Mike asked, suddenly feeling doubt. "Let's get out and see what the problem is," Jason suggested. Surrounded by the dense, dark wall of trees, the friends got out of the car. While Sarah and Jason inspected the engine, Chris and Emma suddenly heard a faint sound from deep in the trees, as if someone was pulling on a branch. "Did you hear that?" Emma whispered, glancing at the shadows between the trees. Chris immediately shifted from his cheerful mood to a more alert one. His eyes narrowed, and he tried to listen carefully. Meanwhile, Mike stepped closer to the trees, clearly deciding to check the source of the sound. "Mike, stop!" Sarah whispered, noticing his movement from the corner of her eye. But it was too late. Mike seemed to disappear between the trunks, as though the darkness had simply swallowed him. The ensuing silence was so thick it felt tangible. "Mike!" Jason called, leaving the engine and walking toward the others. There was no response, only a faint rustling of leaves somewhere in the distance. Sarah grabbed her phone to turn on the flashlight, but the screen showed no signal. "Is this some kind of joke?" Emma asked, looking around. Jason crouched and picked something up from the ground. It was Mike's backpack, which he had somehow left behind. Several twigs hung from the zipper, as if the backpack had been dragged through the dirt. "We can't just wait here," Chris said firmly. "We need to go after him." "No!" Sarah protested. "We'll call for help. Let's get back to the car and—" Her words were interrupted by a loud crack. Everyone turned toward the forest where the sound had come from. In the dim light of the flashlight, they saw a silhouette. Tall, thin, it moved slowly but decisively, staring at them unblinkingly. Emma screamed, and Sarah rushed to the car. But the car wouldn't start anymore, and time seemed to slow down. The figure stopped, now only a few meters away. The face, or what should have been a face, was distorted like a mask with clumps of dirt and moss stuck to it. The creature radiated terror. "Run!" Jason shouted, grabbing the nearest stick. They all scattered in different directions, forgetting about the road. The forest closed in around them like a living trap. Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest. She looked around but saw nothing, only shadows, only darkness. Somewhere ahead, the crackling noise sounded again, and Mike's voice, or what sounded like his voice, whispered, "Come here, help me." But Sarah no longer trusted her ears. In that moment, she realized they were being watched. Not one, not two, but many eyes glinted from the darkness, surrounding her. The steps were getting closer, and this was only the beginning of their nightmare. Sarah, Emma, and Jason found themselves together, gasping for breath. Chris was out of sight, but there was no time to look for him. They stumbled upon a narrow path leading toward a faint light in the distance. "There might be a house or a camp over there," Emma whispered, grabbing Jason's hand. "We need to go there." The three of them, trying to move quietly, followed the light. After a few minutes, they reached a small clearing. In the center stood an old wooden house with crooked walls. Faint lights glowed from the windows. "Maybe there's someone who can help," Sarah began, but her voice trembled. A sinister smell of smoke and something rotten hung around the house. "We need to go in," Jason said firmly, walking toward the door. They knocked. No answer. Then Jason slowly pushed the door open. It creaked, revealing a dark room lit by the weak glow of an oil lamp. The smell inside was even stronger. "Is anyone here?" Jason called as he entered first. Emma and Sarah followed, holding their breath. Suddenly, a loud creak came from the corner of the room. A woman in dirty, torn clothes emerged from the shadows. Her face was pale and scarred. "You're lost, aren't you?" she croaked. Her eyes gleamed with an unnatural light. "Yes, we're looking for a friend," Sarah began, but the woman interrupted her. "You need to rest. Stay the night. Everything will be fine." She stretched out her hand, pointing at a table with plates containing something that looked like meat. Emma felt her stomach churn, but Jason sat down at the table, ignoring their terrified expressions. "Thank you," he said briefly. "Who else lives here?" The woman smiled. "My family. They'll be back soon. You'll like them." A few minutes later, the rest of her family burst through the door. There were 3 of them: a huge man with a crooked grin, a girl about 7 years old with eerie black eyes, and an old man holding a rusty axe. All 3 moved unnaturally smoothly, like predators ready to attack. "Oh, what guests!" the man growled, licking his lips. "Dinner came to us." Sarah felt her legs go weak. Emma screamed, trying to hide behind Jason. The girl, staring without blinking, approached the table and pointed at them with a thin finger. "They don't look tasty," she said with childlike directness. "Mom, why did you bring them?" "Quiet, little one." The woman patted the girl's head. "You haven't even tasted them yet." Jason suddenly stood up, but the old man raised the axe, squinting threateningly. "Sit down," he said in a low voice. "We don't like it when the food makes noise." Meanwhile, the man had gotten closer, his heavy steps sounding like the pounding of a heart. He ran his hand over the table, picking up a knife. "I think we'll start with the loudest," he grinned, looking at Jason. "Aren't you scared, hero?" Jason felt his blood freeze in his veins. His hands clenched into fists, and he quickly scanned the room, looking for any chance to fight back. But at the door stood the old man with the axe, and the giant man slowly approached, his steps like hammer strikes. Emma was a few meters away, trying to stay unnoticed, but her eyes were darting, clearly unsure of what to do. "Don't you understand?" the man said, smirking. His eyes gleamed in the dim light of the lamp. "You're not going to leave here alive." Sarah, standing next to Jason, grabbed his shoulder. She knew their chances of survival were close to 0. This place was a trap. These people, or whatever they once were, had lived here for a long time, and they weren't going to let them leave. "We need to act," she whispered to Jason, quickly, but it was already too late. The woman, who had been watching them with a grim smile the entire time, suddenly stepped forward, her face contorted, and she began to laugh softly, as if she knew what was going to happen next. "You don't need to worry," she said in a soft but ominous voice. "Everything will be fine. Your suffering will end very soon." Chris, who had disappeared somewhere in the forest, now lingered in their minds as an invisible threat. But Sarah suddenly realized he might already be here, among them, perhaps already part of this dark game. "What about my friend, Mike?" Sarah asked, barely holding back hysteria, trying to get an answer. The woman tilted her head, her eyes flashing in the dark. "He's already with us. He's already been tasted. He didn't survive, but you'll understand soon enough." Then something flickered in her eyes. She felt the moment approaching when everything would be decided. Her gaze darted to Emma, and the girl suddenly fell silent, staring at her hand, which was holding something to her body. "Come look," the girl said with a slight giggle, drawing a finger through the air. "She'll be tasty, Mom." Sarah shuddered, her eyes widening in horror. Emma hadn't noticed how the girl had gotten closer, her gaze growing more sinister. "Don't go near her," Sarah screamed, but it was already too late. For a moment, time seemed to stop. There was something almost tangible in the air. And then, as if on cue, all the members of this family, like in some eerie dance, moved toward them, blocking the way to the exit. The man with the knife approached them, his breath heavy and ominous, like the sound of an approaching storm. "Stop!" Jason suddenly shouted, and with that shout, his body seemed to gain incredible strength. He tore the knife from the man's hands, who hadn't expected such resistance. But in this house, among these people, that resistance was futile. In the same moment, the old man with the axe stepped forward, his hands swinging through the air. Sarah and Emma froze in fear. "You realize too late," the man said, grabbing Jason by the throat. But before he could strike, a heavy shadow suddenly burst through the door. Sarah, stunned, barely had time to notice the figure before her gaze froze. Standing before them was a figure in a dark cloak with a hood, its face hidden, but an incredible cold radiated from it. "Get away from them," a cold voice rang out, as though it didn't belong to a living being. The shadow stepped forward, its movements quick and precise. The man with the knife tried to attack, but was knocked to the ground as if he were a mere toy. The old man with the axe froze, and the girl, seeing this figure, immediately disappeared into the shadows. Jason, holding onto the weapon, backed up, his chest heaving. He quickly turned and grabbed Emma and Sarah's hands. "Run!" he shouted. The shadow, leaving behind a trail of terror, didn't interfere with their escape. It disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. The friends, now outside, didn't look back. The forest had become silent again. Only when they were far from that house, hidden in the shadows, did they realize they still weren't safe. It seemed they had escaped one nightmare, only to find themselves in another, and the dark eyes watching them never left.